She had not asked for any of it. Not the bruise on her jaw from the steward's ring, not the summons delivered to her door in the dark before the hall fires were lit. Not the weight of every eye in the court turning toward her like she was something caught and dragged in from the cold. She had only done what she always did. She had told the truth, and the truth had cost her. They called it a formal complaint. They wrote it in the court register with a clerk's careful hand and pressed the wax seal of 7 elder houses into the parchment, and they told her she was summoned to answer for it. 3 winters ago she would have trembled. She had learned a great deal in 3 winters. What she had not yet learned was that the man who would hear the complaint was already watching from a doorway she could not see, and that by the time the court clerk read the first charge aloud, it would no longer matter. The Alpha King dismissed the court, every elder, every registrar, every ranked wolf in the hall, dismissed them and crossed the floor alone. If you want to know what happened before that morning, stay close. This story begins in the winter the court made its mistake, the year of the iron moon, deep into the season they called the binding cold, when the keeps along the northern ridge sealed their gates and the pack hierarchy sharpened itself on whatever it could find. That year, it found Vera. Vera Aldous was an Omega healer's apprentice in the keep of Lord Steward Bren Ulrich, which meant she scrubbed blood from the treatment table, learned the names of roots and bark and pressed flour, and was owed precisely nothing for any of it. She was 22 years old, dark-haired, with hands roughened past what her age should have permitted, and a stillness in her that certain men disliked, because they could not crack it open. She had no packmark. Her mother had died during an outbreak of iron fever when Vera was 8, and her father, a cartographer who mapped borders for traveling merchants, had placed her with the healer Maret Breck as a ward and then mapped himself away south and never returned. She had been with Maret for 14 years. She knew every plant in the cold hills above Ulrich Keep. She knew how to set bone, dress a deep cut, and walk through a room of ranked wolves as if she belonged there, because Maret had told her that confidence was a cloak anyone could wear. Maret was the loyal anchor. She was 70, broad-shouldered, with a voice like gravel in a tin cup, and she had never once bowed to Lord Steward Bren Ulrich without making it look like she was choosing to, which she was. She had been choosing to for 30 years. She had also chosen, 3 months before the complaint was filed, to send Vera across the keep to the East Garrison with a basket of medicines for soldiers recovering from the autumn skirmishes, and it was in that garrison that the first thread was pulled. The garrison's recovery room smelled of pine smoke and old blood. There were 6 men in beds and 1 on a pallet on the floor, and the one on the floor was the reason the other 6 averted their eyes when Vera entered. He was chained. Not for injury management, for containment. The chains were iron-threaded silver and they were thick enough to stop regeneration, and he had been there, she learned later, for 9 days. She set her basket down and checked the 6 in the beds first, methodically, because she was not someone who rushed toward trouble. Then she crouched by the pallet. His face was turned away. He was breathing. Barely. She noted the fever temperature by touch, counted the pulse points she could reach, and registered that whoever had chained him had done so with a cruelty exceeding any medical rationale. The silver threading was designed to keep the wounds open. She had seen this done to criminal wolves. She had never seen it done to someone wearing a guard's insignia, however torn. She cut 2 links with the iron shear she carried for field splinting. Not all of them. 2. Enough to relieve the pressure on the wounds at his left wrist without releasing his mobility. She pressed a clean cloth soaked in fever bark water to the worst of the injuries and left a second cloth within reach of his free hand. She did not know who he was. She did not know that the garrison sergeant had turned pale when she entered, or that the guard outside the door had sent a boy running to Lord Steward Bren the moment her basket came through the gate. She did not know any of that. She packed her basket and went home. The complaint arrived 6 weeks later. It was filed by the Council of Seven Elder Houses, which governed the Western Pack hierarchy beneath King Aldrich of the Iron Throne, and it cited Vera Aldis, Omega, unranked, ward of healer Marit Breck, for interference with a lawful detention order, unauthorized removal of a containment measure, and provision of unsanctioned aid to a prisoner held under state authority. The charges were written in 3 columns and occupied 2 full pages of vellum. The bottom of the second page bore the signature of Bren Ulrich, Lord Steward to the King's Court, in letters large enough to suggest he enjoyed writing his own name. Marit read it twice. Her expression did not change. She handed it back to Vera and said, "They are afraid of something." "Of me?" Vera said. "Oh, of what you saw," Marit said. "Go to the hearing. Say exactly what you did. Say exactly why. Do not apologize for it." The hearing was set for the first morning of the binding moon, which was a court date chosen to humiliate, because the binding moon was the day new pack hierarchies were formally registered, and every ranked wolf in 3 territories would be present. The Great Hall of Aldrich Keep was the venue. The Great Hall held 400 witnesses. Vera had been inside it once, to deliver a fever treatment to an elder who refused to descend to the infirmary. She remembered the height of the stone ceiling, the way sound moved in it, and the smell of old smoke and cold iron. She did not remember it being quite so full of people watching her walk through the door with the kind of attention usually reserved for things that are about to be broken. Lord Steward Bren Ulrich stood at the clerk's table, 3 elders beside him, and he watched her cross the floor with the satisfied expression of a man who had arranged the furniture exactly as he wanted it. "Vera Aldis," the clerk called, "Omega, unranked, ward of Marit Breck, you stand before the Council of 7 Elder Houses to answer charges of—" "She knows the charges," Ulrich said. "Let us hear her account." This was not procedure, this was theater. Vera understood it as theater and said, "I treated a prisoner in the East Garrison who was being kept in a medically unnecessary configuration of silver-threaded chains. I cut 2 links to relieve the pressure at his left wrist. I applied fever bark water to the open wounds. I left him additional cloth for his own use. That is what I did." One of the elders, a woman named Helsa Vorn, whose family had governed the Eastern Territories for 4 generations, said, "You tampered with a lawful containment order." "The order specified detention," Vera said. "It did not specify tissue damage as a condition of that detention. A physician in this keep would make the same argument." "You are not a physician," Ulrich said. "You are an Omega apprentice with no rank and no standing in this court." She felt the room's attention shift, which was a sensation she had learned to read accurately. The shift was not away from her. It was toward the back of the hall. Ulrich felt it too, because his satisfied expression changed slightly at the edges before he controlled it. "Then the charges," Vera said steadily, "should have specified that. They did not. If you will show me where the detention order forbade treatment of infection and fever, I will answer to it. If you are watching this and you know what it costs to tell the truth in a room full of people who have decided you're wrong before you open your mouth, stay close. This next part is why the court made its last mistake." Ulrich's voice lifted to Carrie. "The prisoner you aided was under containment because he had been identified as a threat to this keep's security. Your interference potentially aided an enemy of the crown." "Then charge me with that," Vera said. "The complaint before this court charges interference with detention, not sedition. If you wish to file a sedition charge, I would recommend you confirm first that the man in that cell was not, in fact, a member of the king's own guard." The silence lasted 3 full seconds. Marit had told her. She had not known until Marit told her, 2 days after the garrison visit, that the man on the pallet was a Black Warden, one of the elite force attached directly to the throne. She had not known that the Black Warden had been confined there on Bren Ulrich's personal order, bypassing every protocol that required royal authorization for the detention of crown soldiers. She had not known that was what she had walked into when she cut those two links. She knew now. She had planned to say it here, in this room, because this room had 400 witnesses and a court register open on the table. The 400 witnesses were very quiet. Bren Ulrich said, "You do not know what you are speaking of," and his voice had an edge in it that had not been there before. The soldier's garrison insignia was visible under his tunic, Vera said. His chain configuration did not match any civilian detention protocol. If you dispute this, I invite you to open the garrison register, which should show his entry date and the authorization for his confinement. If the authorization bears the king's seal, I will stand corrected. If it bears only yours, we have a different conversation. The hall's attention shifted again, harder this time, and it was not toward her. She felt the back wall of the room change. She could not explain it as anything other than that. The air changed. The way sound moved changed. The ranked wolves near the doors dropped their gazes slightly, involuntary, a deference so old it preceded conscious thought. And Vera, whose wolf was suppressed, and who had been told for 22 years that she could not read these shifts the way ranked wolves could, read it. She turned. King Aldrich stood at the back of the hall. He had entered through the servants' passage. He was not in formal dress. He wore a dark traveling coat, road-dusted and no crown, and there was an old scar across his jaw that a formal portrait would not show, and he was looking at her with an expression she could not read because she had never seen it directed at her from anyone standing where he stood. He held a single folded document. He had come from the garrison. She understood that immediately. He had come from the garrison and he was holding whatever the register there had shown him. Bren Ulrich had gone very still. The king walked forward, not quickly, deliberately, in the way of a man who has measured every step and finds the room satisfactorily arranged. The 400 witnesses made no sound. He reached the clerk's table and set the document on it. "The court is dismissed," he said. Ulrich said, "My lord king, the complaint has not yet." "The complaint," the king said, "has been filed against a woman who treated one of my black wardens while he was being held without my authorization, in a chain configuration designed to prevent healing, on your order." His voice did not rise. It did not need to. "The court is dismissed. You are not." The elders left. The clerks left. The 400 witnesses filed out with the careful quiet of people who understood that they would be talking about this morning for the rest of their lives, but that talking about it now, in this hall, was not advisable. Marette, near the left wall, did not leave immediately. She caught Vera's eye and her expression said she was not surprised by any of this, which Vera found both steadying and maddening. Then the hall was empty except for Vera, the king, and Bren Ulrich. The king looked at Ulrich for a long moment. Then he said, "Step outside." It was not a request. A guard appeared from the servants' passage and Ulrich went with him, and the expression on Ulrich's face as he passed Vera was the expression of a man confronting the fact that confidence in one's own position is not the same as security in it. She watched him go. She was alone with the king. She did not know precisely what to do with that. He looked at her. She looked at him. He was taller than she had expected from the portraits, and less tidy and more worn around the edges, and the scar on his jaw was the old kind, silver gray, fully healed, and she found herself noting clinically that it had been set well. Someone had closed it cleanly. "You knew," he said, "before you filed the complaint, that he was mine." "I knew 2 days after the garrison visit," she said. "I knew when I was summoned to this hearing that I would say it here." "Why here, and not a private report?" "Because Lord Steward Ulrich controlled every private channel of communication in this keep," she said. "Because a private report can be intercepted or suppressed. Because this hall has a court register and 400 witnesses, And I did not trust that a complaint of unauthorized detention of a crown soldier would survive any other venue. He was quiet for a moment. She held still. You are not ranked, he said. No, you're Wolf. Suppressed, she said. Since childhood. I am told it is a hereditary condition on my mother's side. Who told you that? She paused. Marit Breck. He nodded once, a very small movement. Marit Breck, he said, was also your mother's healer. The floor did something strange, which was to say the floor did not do anything, but Vera's understanding of it shifted. She said, What? Your mother came to this keep, he said, 23 years ago, as a ward of my father's court. Her name was Aldous. She died here. The iron fever outbreak. The healer's records show. But the ward registry shows something else. She was registered as an Omega, no lineage notation. The lineage notation was removed by order of the Lord Steward at that time, who was Bren Ulrich's father. He turned the document on the clerk's table so she could see it. That is a copy of the original registry page, recovered this morning from the East Garrison, where Ulrich's man had placed it for destruction. She read it. She read it twice. Her mother's name. Her mother's lineage notation. Not suppressed. Not Omega, but Aldraline. The old blood. The bloodline from which the first Alpha Kings had taken their consorts for 400 years, before the binding registry had erased it from the common rolls to prevent challenges to contested thrones. The Black Warden I sent to the garrison, the king said, was sent to find exactly this. Ulrich knew he was close. That is why Ulrich confined him. She set the document down. Her hands were steady. She was surprised they were steady. My wolf is suppressed, she said, because someone suppressed it. Almost certainly. She said nothing for a moment. Then, because there was no point in not asking, she said, What happens now to Ulrich? He will answer for the unauthorized detention of a crown soldier, falsification of a lineage registry, and conspiracy to suppress a royal lineage. Those charges carry the consequence you might expect them to carry. His voice was still very level. The council that signed the complaint against you will answer for their participation in the filing of a fraudulent court action. They may not have known. Some of them, he said, did. She folded her hands in front of her. Lord Steward Ulrich has managed this keep for 12 years. The staff, the supply chains, the garrison records are why this will take time to unwind, he said. Yes. I know. He paused. You are not asking about yourself. I assumed, she said, that you would tell me when you chose to. The expression he had worn since he walked through the door shifted. It was not dramatic. It was a small shift at the jaw, a particular quality of attention that narrowed and stilled, and she registered it as something other than official interest before she had time to name it correctly. He said, The Black Warden you treated. His name is Torhen. He is alive because of what you did. I cut 2 chain links, she said. He had 4 days of silver poisoning before you came in. 2 more days would have finished it. You gave him the margin. He paused. He told me, when he could speak, that a woman with dark hair came in, said nothing to him, cut the links, cooled the fever, and left him cloth. That she did not ask who he was. That she did it because the configuration was wrong. Vera said nothing. He also said, the king continued, that she had a wolf, that he could feel it. Suppressed, but present. The silence was the kind that fills a large stone hall with particular weight. She said, I have never shifted. No, he said, but you felt the room change when I walked in. She had. She had turned before anyone who should have sensed him had moved. She thought about denying it. She did not deny it. Yes, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, I have a proposal. It is not an order. You may refuse it. He said this as if it mattered to him that she understood the distinction, which she found, against her better judgment, notable. I need the healer's records from this keep audited by someone with no loyalty to Ulrich's administration. I need someone who can read a lineage registry and identify what has been removed. I need someone whose judgment I have seen function in a room designed to destroy it. You want me to audit your steward's records, she said. I want, he said carefully, to understand what else has been buried here, and I want to understand it before I name a new steward. A pause. The post of court healer is also vacant, has been for 2 years. Marit Breck has declined it 4 times. She said she preferred to remain independent. I begin to think she had her reasons. Vera thought of Maret's expression when the summons came. Maret's particular quality of unsurprisedness. Marit saying, "They are afraid of something." She knew, Vera said. She suspected, he said. She was protecting you until you were old enough and positioned well enough to defend yourself. She was very still. She had a great deal to think about, and this was not the time to think about it, but she could feel it waiting, enormous and patient, at the edge of what she could hold. She said, "If I accept the auditor's role, what is my standing while I do it?" "Court appointed," he said, "under my seal. No one in this keep touches you, questions you, or restricts your access. And if I find things that implicate more than Ulrich, then you bring them to me directly, and we work through the consequence together." He said that last word without flourish, plainly, and she heard it the same way. She said, "I will need Marit." Marit Breck has been offered the court healer post a 5th time as of this morning, he said. I sent the offer before I came to this hall. Her answer arrived while I was watching you address the council. The slight shift at his jaw again. She accepted. Vera looked at him. He looked at her. The hall was very cold and very quiet, and the register on the clerk's table was still open at the complaint page, the ink of 3 columns of charges still clear, and she was thinking that 400 witnesses had just watched a court assembled against an unranked Omega dismissed by the king himself, which was a thing that would travel faster than any dispatch rider. She said, "Then I accept." He nodded. Then he said, "Your mother's name is in that registry. Her line is confirmed. What that means for your formal standing is a process that will take time and proper documentation." Another pause. "But what it means for your wolf can be addressed sooner. There is a Moonright healer in the capital who works suppressions. The reversal is not comfortable, but it is reliable." She said very quietly, "How long has mine been in place?" "Based on the registry date," he said, "approximately 22 years. She absorbed this. 22 years of not knowing what it was she was feeling along the edges of the air every time a ranked wolf entered a room. 22 years of being told she was reading it wrong. The wave of feeling was enormous, and she did not show it, because there were things that she would need to find a private room to hold. And this was not that room. She said, "I want to see Torhen before I begin the audit. He is in the infirmary. I will take you there. You do not have to accompany me." "No," he said. "I know." He came with her anyway. The corridor from the great hall to the infirmary was long and cold, and he walked beside her, not ahead, and the 2 guards who fell in behind them kept a distance that suggested the king had already communicated something about configuration. Vera noted this without comment. She noted the way he walked, too, and the old injury that had set a slight difference in his left stride, and she was already thinking about which bark preparation was best for long-term joint maintenance when she registered that she was thinking about this at all and decided not to examine it yet. In the infirmary, Torhen was sitting up. He was broad-shouldered and gray-eyed, and he had the specific look of a man who had been very close to death and had found the experience clarifying. When Vera walked in, he looked at her steadily for a moment, and then he said, "You didn't ask my name." "I knew what you needed," she said. "Your name was secondary." Something in his expression settled. He said, "The chain links. You used an iron shear. I carry one for field splinting. You knew what the silver threading would do if you left them. Yes. But you came in anyway. She looked at him. You were sick. You were in unnecessary pain. The configuration was wrong. There was no situation in which I was going to leave it. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said to the king, "She's as described." He looked back at Vera. "He talked about you. For 2 days after I came around. He talks about almost nothing." Vera did not look at the king. She could feel that he had stilled. Torhen said, "The garrison register is solid. The lineage page, the detention order, all of it. It'll hold in any court in the northern territories." "Good," the king said. His voice was very level. She went through Torhen's recovery notes methodically, asked him 4 clinical questions, noted that the fever bark had done its work and that the silver toxicity was clearing at the expected rate, and told him that she would check his progress in 2 days. He thanked her without the performance of gratitude, which she appreciated. She did not need gratitude. She needed to know the work had held. In the corridor after, the king said, "He is going to be fine." "Yes," she said, "because of what you did. Because his constitution is strong, and the toxicity had not reached the critical threshold yet when I found him." She paused. 2 more days, and it would have been different. He said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "You do not accept credit easily." "I accept credit for what I did. I cut 2 links and applied fever bark water. The rest was him and time and the specific mercy of the fact that I happened to have the right basket on the right morning." She looked at the corridor wall, stone and frost. "The credit for the larger situation belongs to whoever sent him there to find the registry page. That was the harder decision." She felt him look at her. She did not turn. He said, "I made that decision 4 months ago, when I began to suspect that Ulrich had been managing information out of this region for longer than I had been told. I chose Torhen because he is the most competent man I have, and because I trusted him not to be visible about it." A pause. "I did not anticipate that he would be visible enough to be caught." "He was careful," she said. "Ulrich was more afraid than you knew." "I know that now." She turned to look at him then. He was watching her with that particular stillness, and she thought, not for the first time today, that she was going to need a great deal of time and a quiet room to think through what she was reading in it. She thought of 22 years. She thought of her mother's name in a registry, erased and then restored. A single line of ink that had waited underground through all that cold time. She said, "My mother's lineage, what it means formally. You said it will take time." "Yes, but you already know what it means." He said, "Yes." She said, "Tell me." He was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that is not absence but decision. Then he said, "The Aldra line, in the compact that has governed this throne for 400 years, is the lineage of the true consort. Not a political marriage, not a treaty arrangement, a bond, the kind that cannot be forged or coerced." His voice was very careful and very steady. "The binding registry erased the Aldra line name specifically to prevent that bond from being confirmed in a generation when it would complicate a political succession." She said, "Whose succession?" He said, "My father's." The corridor was very cold. She said, "And now?" He said, "There is no political complication. I have no arranged consort. The council that would have objected signed a fraudulent complaint this morning, and will be spending the next several months answering for it." The slight shift at his jaw. "I am telling you this because you asked me to tell you, and because you told me earlier that you did not trust venues where information could be suppressed. This corridor has no witnesses and no register. I chose it for that reason. What I say here is yours. You can do with it what you judge right." She stood with that for a long moment. Stone and cold and the smell of the infirmary just behind and the great hall just ahead. and between them this corridor and this man and 22 years of a wolf she had never known she had. She said, "The bond. You said it cannot be forged or coerced." "No. What confirms it?" He said, "Contact and recognition. Both already." He stopped. He looked at her. The expression she had been unable to name in the great hall was not complicated, she realized. It was simply rare. It was the expression of a man who had carried something alone for a very long time, and had not expected to set it down here, in a cold corridor, before a woman with frost-reddened hands who had walked into a room full of people designed to dismiss her and told the truth without apologizing for it. She said, "Both already." He said, "Yes?" She turned this over. She considered the registry page and the garrison and the court, and Marit's acceptance of the court healer post at a fifth asking, and Torin's gray-eyed steadiness, and the way the hall had shifted when this man walked through the servant's door, and the way she had felt it before anyone else moved. She said, "When the suppressant clears, and the bond is fully confirmed, the court will require a formal record." "Yes." "The same court that this morning filed a complaint against me for cutting 2 chain links." "A different composition of it," he said. "The 7 houses involved this morning will not be seated for that record." She said, "Good." She looked at him. "I want the audit completed first. I want to understand the full extent of what Ulrich managed before I stand in any hall for any purpose. I need to know the ground I'm standing on." He said, "That is a reasonable condition." "It is not a condition," she said. "It is what I need." He said, "Yes." The word was simple and total, and she heard it the way she heard his claim lines, not as compliance, but as recognition. She said, "Then we start in the morning." They walked back toward the great hall, and the guards fell in behind them, and in the clerk's office that adjoined the hall, the court register was still open to the complaint page, 3 columns of charges against Vera Aldis Omega, unranked, ward of healer Maret Breck. She stopped at the door and looked at it. Then she crossed to the table and, without asking permission, turned the register to a clean page. She did not write anything on it. She simply stood there for a moment and let the clean page be clean. He watched from the doorway. He did not speak. She closed the register and set it back. The audit took 6 weeks. It uncovered 3 additional falsified lineage registrations, 11 unauthorized detention orders, 2 suppressed court complaints from the previous decade, and a correspondence between Bren Ulrich and 2 of the 7 elder houses that established their knowing participation in the morning's fraudulent filing. Marit took the court healer post and expanded the infirmary staff by 3, and reorganized the supply chain in a way that revealed 2 years of diverted medicines that had been sold to a border market. Torhen recovered fully and took a post coordinating the keep's garrison restructuring at Vera's suggestion, because she had watched him for 6 weeks and determined that he was precise, fair, and constitutionally incapable of looking away from a configuration that was wrong. Bren Ulrich was tried before the Northern Pack Council in the 3rd week of the binding cold. He was found guilty on all counts. He did not leave the trial with the title he had walked in with. The Moonright healer came from the capital in the 4th week. The reversal was, as advertised, not comfortable. Vera spent 2 days in a room in the infirmary that Marit had prepared for the purpose, with Marit present and the king outside the door in the corridor for the better part of both nights, because he had decided, apparently, that the corridor was an acceptable place to be, and she decided, apparently, to let him make that decision. On the 3rd day, she shifted for the first time. She was 22 years old, and her wolf was white-gray, which was not a color associated with Omega bloodline, and the Moonright healer looked at it, and then looked at Maret, and said something in the old tongue that Vera could not hear clearly, but that Maret heard very clearly. because Marette's expression went through something complicated and then settled into the very specific quality of unsurprisedness that Vera had been reading her whole life. The bond confirmed itself in the infirmary doorway, which was not the formal setting the court protocols would have preferred. There was no assembly and no dais and no formal record. There was only the king, who had been in the corridor, and Vera, who came through the door on the third morning still shaking from the reversal, and the particular quality of the air between them going abruptly, entirely, and irrevocably clear. He said nothing. He held out his hand. She took it. The light that rose from the contact was warm and gold-white, and it was visible from the infirmary to the hall, and the guards in the corridor saw it, and Marit saw it, and Torhen, who had come on healer's business and had excellent timing, saw it. The formal record was filed the following week before the restructured Northern Pack Council, with the registry page restored, the lineage notation confirmed, and a new court register open to a clean page. The council that had signed the complaint was not seated for it. The ones who had not known were reprimanded. The ones who had known were not at the table. She stood on the dais in the great hall, which she had crossed 6 weeks before with every eye in the room expecting her to break, and she stood there in the plain, good wool she had worn that morning, and not a court gown, because she did not own a court gown and saw no particular urgency in acquiring one, and beside her, the king stood with his formal chain and no crown, because he had stopped wearing the crown in the keep, and she suspected this was a recent development. The Pack Council acknowledged the bond. The assembly in the hall acknowledged it. Some of them had been there 6 weeks ago. Most of them, watching her now, wore expressions that suggested they were doing the arithmetic of the last 6 weeks and finding the calculation illuminating. The king did not make a speech. He said to the assembly, "The record is filed." And then he said to her, in the tone that was simply terse and total and unelaborated, "This is the standing you were owed from the beginning." She did not glow. She did not weep. She stood with her chin level and her hands still, and she thought of her mother's name in a registry, waiting 23 years to be correct. She thought of Marette in the doorway of the healer's cottage, telling her that confidence was a cloak anyone could wear, and that she had never been wearing just the cloak. That evening, Marette found her in the restored infirmary and sat beside her and said nothing for a long time. Then Marette said, "You did well." Vera said, "I cut 2 chain links." Marette said, "Yes, and you did not apologize for it." Outside, the binding cold had begun to ease. Not warmth, not yet, but the first suggestion that it would not last forever. The frost on the high windows thinned at the edges. The wolves in the keep yard moved without the particular stillness of deep cold. Vera sat with Marette's hand over her roughened ones, and the new court register was in the clerk's office down the corridor. And somewhere in the keep, the king was in a meeting she had excused herself from and would be done with in an hour. And her wolf, white-gray and still new to her, was very quiet in the way of things that have waited a long time and found the waiting was done. She had told the truth. She had not apologized for it. The court had filed its complaint, and the king had dismissed the court, and what came after was simply the world, made accurate at last.